Those of you who are longtime viewers of my channel know of my fascination with the 1966 UFO flap, which was ultimately explained away as swamp gas here in Michigan. I have a number of videos up already on the subject and on my own personal sighting of that year, but I'm always on the lookout for new accounts that I've not previously seen. Now recently I found an article published in a July 1966 magazine, as sightings were still being made at that time. There's no way I can relate the tension that seemed so thick in the air. Everyone was talking about it, and emotions ranged from fascination to fear. I was 11 years old and my emotion was fear, especially after my own sighting, which took place in Bridgeport, Michigan. The article deals with the original core sightings of March and April 1966. The article, titled "The Great UFO Flap at Ann Arbor," follows in its entirety. A light shone from the lonely farmhouse at the end of unpaved McGinnis Road, and inside a rugged man held a school notebook containing his sketch of a bizarre vehicle he said that he and his son had confronted hours before in the nearby swamp. The floor of the house was muddied with the tracks of dozens of persons, relatives, Washtenaw County sheriffs, and local police who had rushed to this house in Dexter, Michigan, about 7 miles northwest of the university town of Ann Arbor. Now, throughout the night, the deputy sheriffs returned to their headquarters in Ann Arbor to type reports of the strange colored lights in the sky that they had pursued along winding country roads and in the marshland. And Dexter local police puzzled over the weird siren-like noises and pulsating lights that had jarred their evening. Before the week was out, the United States Air Force would dispatch a scientific expert from Project Blue Book, the UFO investigative operation, to Dexter. And in Washington, there would be talk of a congressional investigation. It was a Sunday night, March 20th, when Frank Manor, 47, and a truck driver, stepped from his rented house at the end of dirt McGinnis Road. Manor rented the house from the owner of the 90-acre cattle farm in which it sat, amidst sparsely developed farmland, hillocks, and fields. It was towards 8 o'clock p.m. when he saw it. And he explained, "I just walked outside and it looked like a fallen star. It went to the top of the trees, all red, and then blue lights, then a white rotating light," he said. And he shouted for his wife, Leona, 19-year-old son, Ronald, his daughter, Diana, 18, and her husband, Donald Merkel, to come and see. And pulling her robe tightly around her, Mrs. Manor later described the sight. She said, "You could see it rise from the ground and hit the treetop a while and fall back down to the ground, and it would get different colors, white on the ground, blue, and then red in the trees, and then come down and change color again." After the police were summoned, Manor and his son cautiously left the house to explore. "It looked like it was trying to rise up," Manor recounted. "My son and I decided to go down there. We got within 500 yards of that thing, and it looked pyramid-like. It had a light here and a light here and a white light that looked like a porthole. It wasn't like the picture of a saucer. It was pyramid-shaped, and it had a coral-like surface. I've tapped every hole in this county, and I've never seen anything like it," Manor said. The boy said, "Look at the horrible thing there, Dad," and then the lights went out. Manor had a rough sketch of the triangular-shaped object drawn on the page of the notebook. The few lines behind it represented Peach Mountain, and nearby was Territorial Road. "The light was there, and there," Manor said, pointing to both ends of the object. "And here, below it, it looked like a heat wave. There was a brownish surface. I've always trapped, and I know every pothole in this county, and in this country," he repeated. "I've never seen anything like it, and I've been in Mexico, the Mojave Desert, everywhere." Manor estimated the object to be the length of an auto, with what appeared to be a quilted surface and something turning underneath it. He and his son saw it because of the lights that it gave off, he said. And when the lights went out, Manor said, he and his son jumped a fence, ran across the creek, and rushed towards the object as fast as they could cover the swampy ground. And Manor said they found nothing, but in seconds they saw a light a half a mile away. "There's nothing wrong with my eyes, and my son has 20/20 vision. We both can't be wrong," he said. "You walk down, and there's no road. You walk to Territorial Road, and there's swamp. They couldn't rig anything there. There was no rigging to it." Manor said his son Ronald, a high school track runner, is one of the fastest around, and by the time he got there, what they had seen had vanished. Now, by this time, the police had surrounded the lights, and Dexter Police Chief Robert Taylor and Patrolman N.G. Lee had rushed to the Manor house when they heard the report. We saw it from the hills, and it looked like it was down in the swamp, Taylor said. We saw this red glow down in the swamp. With binoculars, we could see it. It was a pulsating red light. Lee puffed slowly on his cigarette to illustrate the red glow. The chief described it and said, "Don't ask me what it was. Here's what it looked like." We couldn't see anything but the lights, Lee said, and when we got into the swamp, there wasn't anything there. When our flashlights came in toward it, it disappeared. We heard a noise, Chief Taylor said, and Lee tried to duplicate the sound. Wah! It was like an ambulance. There were 4 of us, and we all heard it. And by the time the noise was audible, Manor had returned to the house. His wife recalled, "We were inside when the sound went off, and we heard a screeching." The only sound we heard, Manor said, was the high-frequency sound over the house. It sounded like the ricochet of a bullet. Down in the swamp, they said it sounded like a siren. But it was a real high frequency up here. The Washtenaw County Sheriff, Douglas J. Harvey, was alerted to the Manor call, and he dispatched all available deputies to the area. 6 patrol cars, carrying 12 men and 3 detectives, rushed to Dexter. While some watched the lights from the Manor home, and the father and son were in the swamp, the deputy sheriffs moved in from Territorial Road on the opposite side. A Dexter patrolman later reported that he saw what appeared to be a flying object with red and green flashing lights hover close to the ground, hang above a scout car, and then join another object in the sky in an apparent formation. Washtenaw Deputy Sheriff David Fitzpatrick, 24, said he responded to the Manor call and went on foot into the swamp with another deputy. "The only thing we saw was a brilliant light, and by the time we got there, it disappeared," Fitzpatrick said. "While we were in the swamp, we were informed it hovered above the car." Later, back at the county sheriff's headquarters, a sketch was put together, a composite of the various descriptions, and it was a convex shape with a light at each end and a light in the center, the 2 antennae from the bottom, and a grillwork pattern on the surface resembling quiltwork. Washtenaw Deputy Sheriff Buford Bushrow added more strange elements to the hectic Sunday night. "I didn't see the one that landed," he said, "but at 11:15 p.m. we were heading back into Ann Arbor from Dexter. I looked up to the south and saw the this bluish-green, brilliant red and white light, and it looked like an arc. It was rounded. We turned around and started following it back through Dexter for 5 miles. It was headed west, and we stopped," he said. "We lost it in the trees. Either the lights were off, or it took off with a tremendous burst of speed. It was about 1,500 feet from the ground, and it moved along at 100 miles per hour, and we were doing 70 miles per hour, and it stayed well ahead of us." The pursuit took them along Dexter and Arbor Road and in Island Lake Road, and to the intersection of Wiley Road. Robert Douglas Taylor, the 16-year-old son of Chief Taylor, was at his home on Island Lake Road when, at 10:30 p.m. Sunday, he said he spotted something in the sky and watched it through binoculars. It was going off in an eastward direction, pretty slow. It sped up and went west. It was flashing red and white, he said. And Chief Taylor said later, there were a couple of other reports last week. The midnight patrolmen saw it. They saw 3 or 4 in a formation around the center of town. From her recollection of Sunday night, Mrs. Manor also said that one of her married daughters, who lives nearby, heard a strange noise like the roar of a train over the house at 3 o'clock a.m. one day the previous week. And as Frank Manor put it all, these puzzling things together with the sight he had just witnessed, he said, somewhat saddened, "My wife said, we'll move out of here. I never even used to lock the doors. Nobody ever bothered us." On Monday night, curiosity seekers converged on Dexter. One man reportedly played a fiddle hoping to lure the saucers. A man who said he was a university professor sat in his car for almost an hour blinking the Morse code sign for pi in hopes of starting a universal dialogue. And another came with a shortwave radio to pick up any sounds. During the day, the detectives searched the ground of the sighting, but they found nothing. Their Geiger counters registered no radioactivity, and by now, Selfridge Air Force Base had forwarded reports of the Sunday night sighting to higher command. Near the scene of the Dexter encounter is the University of Michigan radio telescope. An 85-foot diameter antenna scoops radio waves out of space, but guess what? It was not in use Sunday night. The Chrysler Corporation operates a missile and space work complex at Chelsea, west of Dexter, but it reported it had no activity Sunday night. On Monday night, the excitement was 65 miles southwest of Ann Arbor at Hillsdale, Michigan. About 30 co-eds at Hillsdale College, along with an assistant dean and the Hillsdale County Civil Defense Director, William Van Horn, watched a very strange sight. From 10 p.m. until 2 a.m. during a thunderstorm, and thereafter, they observed a pyrotechnic display of changing lights in a swamp about 1,500 yards from the campus, and what some described as revolving, shifting shapes. By Tuesday, March 22nd, the Air Force announced that Dr. J. Allen Hynek, scientific consultant to Project Blue Book, would investigate the Dexter sightings, and he would also check the Hillsdale sightings. The bearded astrophysicist from Northwestern University had checked over 100 sightings for the Air Force in the last 18 years. In the next few days, newspapers carried the reports of new sightings in southeastern Michigan. Oakland County deputies received calls from Milford residents of red, white, and orange-colored objects in the sky. Washtenaw County Sheriff deputies said they watched a flying object for 45 minutes from 4 miles west of Ann Arbor on Thursday night. Amateur photos of purported sightings were published, but the streaks and smudges only added to the mystery. The Detroit Press Club was jammed with newsmen on Friday, March 25th, when Dr. Hynek faced a battery of television cameras and presented his findings on the Dexter and Hillsdale sightings. I have had time to determine that in Hillsdale, over and above the sincere and honest reporting of the young ladies at Hillsdale College of a very puzzling sighting, certain young men have played pranks with flares, he said. And as to the photographs published the previous day of a sighting at Milan, Michigan, on March 17th, he said, they were trails made as a result of a time exposure of the rising crescent moon and the planet Venus. He then commented on the Dexter and Hillsdale sightings in detail. The majority of observers in both cases have reported only lights, red, yellow, and green, silent glowing lights near the ground. They have not described an object. Even the only two observers who did describe an object have stated they were no closer than 500 yards, better than a quarter of a mile away, a distance which does not allow details to be determined. Dr. Hynek said witnesses pinpointed the glowing lights in both cases in a swamp, and he remarked a dismal swamp is a most likely place for visitors from outer space. It is not a place where a helicopter would hover and for several hours, or where a soundless secret device would be likely to be tested. The astrophysicist quoted from the Dutch astronomer Menneret's Light and Color in the Open Air, in which he describes lights resembling tiny flames, sometimes on the ground, sometimes floating above it, sometimes red, yellow, or blue, and green. He said they are flames that go out in one place and appear in another, giving the appearance of motion. They give off no heat and do not char the ground. They may stay the whole night, he said, with usually no sound except the popping sound of little explosions, such as when a gas burner ignites. Dr. Hynek's written statement did not explain the screeching and siren-like noises reported by witnesses, and the manner's description of the spacecraft, or whatever was dismissed in that statement by the conclusion that 500 yards was too great a distance from which to see anything in detail. The scientist said rotting vegetation in the swamp produces a marsh gas which can be trapped by ice and released when a spring thaw comes. The flame that sometimes results is a chemical luminescence and of low temperature. The glowing lights on the swamp near Dexter and Hillsdale were observed for 2 or 3 hours. No sounds were heard except the popping sounds. The lights were red, green, or yellow, and they appeared to move sideways and to rise a short distance, the Air Force investigator reported. And he continued, it seems likely that as the present spring thaw came, the trapped gases, CH4, H2S, and pH3 resulting from decomposition of organic materials were released. Dr. Hynek, quoting from a chemistry book, said the phosphine, pH 3, in the air usually bursts into flame, apparently ignited by a spontaneous oxidation of the impurity P2H4, and that other gases in the swamp could then be ignited. He said, "It would seem to me that the association of the sightings with the swamps in these particular cases is more than coincidence. No group of witnesses observed any craft coming to or going away from the swamps. The glow was localized there." Deputy Fitzpatrick described the glow from beyond a rise adjacent to the swamp as visible through the trees. He stated that the lights brightened and dimmed as much as stage lights do, smoothly and slowly. And the girls at Hillsdale described the identical thing. They could have been due to the release of variable quantities of marsh gas. The scientists theorized that the disappearance of the lights when people approached with flashlights indicated that the glow seemed bright to dark adapted eyes. The night was dark, he said. There was no moon. The Hillsdale girls kept their rooms dark in order to see the swamp lights. Now, Dr. Hynek said it appeared likely that the combination of the conditions of this particular winter, an unusually mild one in this area, and the particular weather conditions that night, there was little wind at either location, were such as to produce this unusual and puzzling display. But even as he gave his results, there was a suggestion made in Washington by Michigan Republican Congressman Gerald R. Ford, House Minority Leader, that a congressional committee should check the UFO question. And even Dr. Hynek, in presenting his opinion, said, "I emphasize in conclusion that I cannot prove in a court of law that this is a full explanation of these sightings." That concludes the article. You know, I remember that March, April, May, and June, actually, too, so very well, all this time later. And I understand that Dr. Hynek was under pressure to come up with an explanation to quell what was a very real fear and concern here in Michigan. It's hard to describe what it was like at that time, you know. But Bridgeport, where I lived at that time, was quite a bit north and east of Dexter and Ann Arbor and those places. And yet, that night at my parents' house in May, late May, early June, 1966, I saw a huge oval green glowing object in the night sky, soundlessly floating, glowing across the sky. And I sat there and watched it, too scared to say, "Look, Dad, Mom." And so I wonder, even all these years later, what they would have said, what their thoughts would have been on it. Swamp gas? I think not. Extraterrestrial visitors? Who knows? Demonic falling angels, as some people suggest? Could be. I don't know what their purpose would have been. But it's an enigmatic mystery. And I hope you've enjoyed listening to this article. And that if you had sightings in the spring or summer of 1966 here in Michigan, please leave a comment and let me know. I'd be more than interested in hearing what you saw and what your thoughts are. Thanks for listening. God bless, and have a great night.